Right, welcome back everybody for part two of Keeping the Calm. In this section of our parent instruction, we're going to be discussing choices and consequences. Giving children the autonomy and the independence to make a choice is one of the most powerful things that you can do for your child. However, with this right to choose also comes consequences. And it brings me back to that old adage, we are free to choose, but we are not free from the consequences of our choices. And this is something that as adults we now understand. And why not teach this to our children from a young age? Allow them to know that they can make a choice. They choose how they respond to situations. And every choice that they make has a consequence. Just moving. So choices have consequences. So when a child has made a poor choice, we need to respond to that choice with a consequence. But it needs to be a logical consequence. Things like detention and being kept in after school don't make logical sense for a child who forgot to do their homework. How does failure to do your academic expectations connect to having detention 4 days later on a Friday? So that is why we try to avoid such consequences, and the consequence needs to match perfectly with the choice that that child made. This brings me to the adage, prepare your child for the path and not the path for your child. And we hear jokes about helicopter parenting, and this is what I would refer to as lawnmower parenting. But we all do it with the best intentions. If we are hovering over our child, or if we're clearing the way for them and making sure that they don't get into trouble, we're doing it with the best intentions. No parent thinks that over parenting their child in that way is detrimental to them. But the reality is that unless you can guarantee that you will be with your child for their entire life, and you will be able to always get them out of any consequence, then you are setting your child up for challenges in life. Children whose parents don't hold them to consequences have a lack of resilience where they can't bounce back from things. They can't overcome because they give up. They don't understand that difficulty and struggle is a natural part of learning and growing. They also have no accountability for their behaviors. Therefore, the behaviors can escalate. Nobody just starts off with an 18-year-old that takes their parents' car in the night and smashes it into a wall. That all often starts with them being allowed to get away with the small things that don't seem to matter, but actually they really do. Another psychological disadvantage of always preparing the path for your child is that it actually delays the onset of adulthood. And there is still that reliance and that dependence on parents. And unfortunately, with the best intentions, if we do this, we are actually denying our child the opportunity to grow into being a successful adult. And then you also have the case of children not realizing that they need to earn their success, that they're not just entitled to everything. And this is why struggle and difficulty and negative experiences, as hard as they are for us as parents, are really important for our children to go through. I love this because it really, as a parent, gives me an opportunity to reflect. But it says if you spend enough time defending your child's bad behavior, you will eventually pay an attorney to do the same. And that sounds dramatic. Like if we're talking about a child and a catty and, they shot a friend, how does that then become a child who becomes a criminal? And I'm not saying that your child is going to become a criminal, but what I am saying is if our children are not held accountable for the small things, they are not going to understand that there are consequences to their actions. And one day they might then make a very big mistake that has very serious consequences that us as parents are unable to make right. So we do need to be our child's advocates, but we cannot be complicit in their bad behavior. And in fact, sometimes really being your child's advocate means that you even have to reveal that mistake that they made in order that they can have consequences so that they can learn while they're still young. So, for example, if your child brings toys home from school, you know that those aren't your toys. Your child's not a thief. They're not a bad child. They just made a poor choice. But if you don't hold them accountable for that, that poor choice is going to grow and escalate, and you're not protecting your child from bigger challenges in life. So rather let them come to school and admit, I took the toy cars, um, and get a reasonable consequence than them think that they got away with it, and then also having that guilt with them. So, I've spoken about logical consequences. All choices have a consequence and it has to be connected. They have to make sense to the child. So the three we talk about at school, we talk about the three R's when it comes to logical consequences. And whenever we are selecting a consequence, we make sure that it is relevant. Is this consequence directly relevant to what happened? Is it respectful? We must never choose consequences that humiliate, embarrass, or shame children and make them feel that their worth is being questioned. And then is it reasonable? Like, is it really reasonable for a 3-year-old to have to stay in their room for an hour? No, it's not. So these are the three R's that we always reflect on, and they're really powerful because if we choose consequences that are relevant, respectful, and reasonable, then our mission is going to be accomplished. So we look at consequences in three different buckets. One of them is lose a privilege. So this is where we say you go without until you treat it right. So for example, here's a picture of somebody rolling their eyes. So what do you do if your child rolls their eyes at you? Very simple. The offense is that they have not spoken to you in a respectful way. The consequence is that you will end the conversation and you will no longer continue with it until they can come back and be respectful. So they lose the privilege of continuing the conversation with you until they can show that they are going to treat you right. In the other picture, something a little bit more tangible is a child playing unsafely on equipment. Very easy. We think to ourselves, what is relevant to this? Well, if you can't treat it right, you lose the privilege. So you may not play on that equipment because you're not treating it right. We don't send the child to punishment the next day or write a letter to the parents and say, please speak to your child. The consequence is immediate. You're not treating it right, you may not use it. When you can treat it right, you may use it. Seems very simple, but sometimes in the moment as parents, we're like, oh, what am I going to do? Always think, what is the opposite of what they're doing, and kind of go with that. Here's another one. If you take your scissors and you cut another child's hair, what would the consequence be? Well, the consequence would be that if you can't play with the scissors and you can't use the scissors in the way that they were intended, you lose the privilege. You're fighting over your Xbox remote. You're going to damage it. Well, you don't know how to treat your things. You lose the privilege of using it, and you remove it from them until they can prove to you that they have earned the right and you can trust them to use that equipment. So lose a privilege really is a powerful one and a very simple one for us to use with our children. Next is you break it, you fix it. So this is, we basically say sorry and make it right. So we talk about an apology of action, meaning sorry shouldn't just be a word. It's not something we say. Sorry is actually something we physically do. It's not a noun, it's a verb. So we make an action to fix what we've broken. So for example, if you break a toy, if you break a pencil, if you break some equipment, you are going to have to fix it. And that might mean you take it and repair it, or you buy a new one. And when you do get asked to please replace something, we do ask parents, please don't go and buy it yourself. The child needs to understand the cost and the consequence of breaking that thing. Even if it's a 2 Rand pencil, it's not about the 2 Rand. It's about your child realizing that anything that they break or damage, they are going to have to fix. So make them go and do some extra dishes or wash the car to earn the money to be able to pay for the thing that they need to fix. Because otherwise, even if you are actually paying for it, if they don't think it's coming out of their pocket, they're not going to feel the true gravity of that consequence. Another part of you break it, you fix it actually comes down to relationships. So when children have not played nicely, they've said unkind things, they have broken a friendship, they need to fix it. Just saying sorry is not what fixes a relationship. So you need to talk about what happened? Why did you make that choice? What did that person do that made you feel that that was the best response? Okay, so if he stole your eraser in the classroom or he used it without permission, so you called him a horrible name, what could you have done instead? What was the other option? Okay, you could have used a firm voice. So you talk about options and other things that they could have done in the moment. And then you say to them, now, how are you going to make this right? With younger children, if they've called people names, we ask them to apologize and then say something nice about their child. As they get older, you can ask them to list more things. The even older children can write an apology letter. And in that apology letter, they can list like 5 nice things that they like about that person. So they're learning to fix what they broke. Then other things like if you make a mess, you clean it up. And this is literally something we can do with our children from even before they're walking. When they're having a yogurt and they're feeding themselves and they make a mess, you don't have to be angry, but you just teach them, oh, you made a mess. Let's get the cloth and let's clean it up together. So you're teaching them that they need to fix whatever it is they've done. So even if you're helping them when they're really small, they need to understand that they are responsible for what they did. And then the last bucket that we use is take a break. Because sometimes you need some time to gather yourself. Sometimes our emotions can take us away, and we, even as adults, we make mistakes. We say things that we wish we hadn't said. We don't always count to 10. So, and how much more are children vulnerable to just reacting out of emotion? So we use a take a break, but I do want to clarify that this is not timeout or punishment. We are not using the separation from the peer group and that as the punishment. What it is we frame it positively that this is an opportunity for you to calm down, to be the boss of your feelings so that we can then talk about what happened. And the power of this is the conversation you're going to have afterwards. But you cannot have a conversation when someone is in the thick of the emotion. So you can see I put some down arrows there because we're not putting them on a timeout chair. We're not putting them in a corner. We're not separating them from others because we don't think that they're worthy of being there. But we are giving them the opportunity to be masters of their emotions. So this is what we do. Take a break needs to be a positive thing. It's a time of contemplation. It's a time where you're in a calm and safe space. It can happen on your bed. It can happen anywhere. It's not a punitive penalty box. I think this is very powerful. But take a break is not effective if you're not going to have the conversation afterwards where you unpack the choice that they made. And that is after the consequence. So no matter what the consequence is that you've chosen, the power of the learning is in the reflection. It's in their conversation where you talk about their choice and what were the other choices they could have made. Also, this is where you need to reaffirm the love. This is when you say to them, I know you made a bad choice, but you are not a bad child. You just made a bad choice. And I love you. And I love you so much that I want to help you to make better choices because I know what a kind and caring child you are. And I know that you don't really want to hit your brother, but you were feeling angry and you made a bad choice. And that is where you also reaffirm the lesson. So in reaffirming the lesson, you're also reaffirming and reestablishing that love connection, and you are reflecting with the child, because that is the power of the consequence. And that takes us to the end of part 2. Please join us next time for part 3, where we will be talking about top tips.